On to transport matters now. This is Monday lunchtime. The tide is reportedly turning at the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, if you believe the Transport Minister, Fikile Mbalula, who's given that upbeat assessment to Parliament. But here's the caveat. The Passenger Rail Agency is still in financial difficulties. Its capital budget is mostly unspent in spite of the need to replace trains and infrastructure. Here now is Leonard Ramatlakane, who sits on the agency's board. Mr. Ramatlakane, good afternoon to you and welcome. I want to first of all quote the acting group chief executive officer, who's described the causes of poor audit performance by Prasa as thus: inadequate oversight, leadership instability, poor record keeping, lack of compliance monitoring, and poor financial management, a general lack of effort. How can the tide be turning at Prasa when an indictment like that is handed down?
Well, of course, good afternoon. We have to keep chipping on the problems so that the problems goes away. We have to work on it every day to make sure that problem get resolved, the weaknesses that are there, that the weaknesses are addressed. So as you caught me now, I'm quite in a meeting dealing with the challenges that we have as a passenger rail. And the commitment is that we need to turn things around. We must bring back the service. The poor, the majority of people who uses, who rely on, depend on it, requires that service. And in fact, I must say to you that what you've just said and what the acting group CEO said is correct. I mean, we have inherited the situation which is not so good, but we can't complain about that. We must now say, let's fix what is not good together so that tomorrow we have a better system.
How exactly, Mr. Ramatlakane, in your opinion then, and I given that new Brum and all of that, how exactly is the tide turning then? Where are you seeing improvement, if at all?
Well, I can say to you that you remember that we didn't have any train running countrywide. Because of the challenges that, on top of the challenges we had obviously COVID-19, and on top of COVID-19 we had the whole country, the network damage, vandalism, and people just helping themselves. So we ended up basically with almost ground zero. So we're now working ourselves up from ground zero. We have now, out of the 46 corridors where we have a corridor metro rail running, today countrywide there's about 16 that is operational. So every day we're working on that. Mabupani, even though the overhead connections, electricity has been damaged, the introduction of the locomotives that runs with diesel, and obviously that means that we can't run the full service as we expected. So even in Cape Town, where in terms of the directive of the President to restore Central Line, some of the work that has been done there, gradually we are turning the tide because we are bringing the service. And I must say to you that this is not about just spinning, and it's not easy, it's tough, but it's a commitment to do it. And we have been engaging with the Transnet as also another sister SOE. There's quite willingness to collaborate on a number of areas where we require some kind of capacity in terms of addressing us, whether we're going to deal with the coaches that are not necessarily being repaired. Transnet is willing to look at the collaboration with us. The issues about the overheads, the locomotives that we are also getting to lease from Transnet while we are solving the other locomotives that we have in Spain. All of that shows that there's a commitment going forward. The most important part is the issue about making sure that we have a general overall contract in place, because remember, if a train there's a breakdown, you need to have a place where you're fixing it. That contract has lapsed for many years. Now our work now is basically to revive it, to make sure that there is a geo contract that when you have a problem, there is somewhere where a train can be repaired.
Right. Mr. Ramatlakane, let me suggest to you, sir, that you're not going to get this right unless you start bringing down staff costs. Again, looking at the report from the Auditor General, fare revenue declined by R500 million, yet you increased staff costs by R100 million in 2019-2020. The reality of the situation is that the agency is simply bloated.
Well, that's we're doing the structural review, the delivery model review. It may end up with that point, but that's not a starting point. The starting point is to basically say, what are all of these things that are broken that we can fix? We identify 5 things that we need to do, critical to the service, critical to the survival of the service. Is that stability that we talked about earlier on, in terms of management, policy, governance. That when you talk about no records keeping, all of that we identify as the priority number 1. It's been suggested by the AG. Auditor General has highlighted that particular problem. Then we said what the next thing that we need to do is to make sure that we focus on the core function. And the core function at the moment of Prasa is make sure that we move people, transport people.
Right. Mr. Ramatlakane, I am rudely going to interrupt you there. We're not going to have time, unfortunately, to get to those other 3 crucial issues, but what I do want to do is to return to the subject on another occasion, because it's absolutely critical, because so many thousands of people depend on the Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa. Leonard Ramatlakane sits on the agency's board. Thank you very much for joining us.